Welcome into the Pick Six Podcast. Evan Bland here with Jimmy Watkins and Sam McKewon with the Omaha World-Herald. It's like 10 degrees outside, but our takes in here will be warm to lukewarm.
Sizzling.
Maybe even warmer than that if we really get into something today. It's sort of the January, doldrums, if you will. Men's basketball's on COVID pause. The football roster churn is finally starting to slow down again. We're a month away from baseball, but I don't know. It still seems like there's a lot going on. How have you guys been handling this month? What's going on with y'all?
We'll talk about this on a later podcast, but of course I've had a Twitter account drama. We'll talk about it when it's resolved or not resolved. But that's taken up some of my time this week. What's also taken up my time is just I'm kind of going through Nebraska's roster and kind of trying to think about the position battles that are ahead. We'll be previewing those position battles in February and just kind of looking at what's going to be interesting, what isn't going to be interesting, and obviously the quarterback situation is what it is. I mean, you're going to have 5 guys in the room, 6 if you include Matt Masker. And, certainly your thought immediately goes to the drama, the inherent interest and drama of that particular race.
Yeah, I don't know. My life is still directly tied to my car and the troubles that I've had with it. I don't think I've talked about it on the pod, but since I've moved to Nebraska, my car has been towed twice. I have been pulled over 3 times, 0 tickets, but pulled over 3 times. And I've caught a flat in Omaha on my way back to Lincoln. And I also spun on a ditch. So it's been great.
But nothing's happened in the last 2 weeks.
No.
That's good.
Well, I mean, I'm working with the insurance to correct some of these issues, but other than that, no. That's me.
You, Jimmy, like all of us, live in Lincoln, and so I feel like every time we come up here, I'm kind of on edge, like what happened to Jimmy this week.
I can add to, I was talking to Chucky Hepburn's dad this morning, and it might not just be me, because he had a flat tire incident last night on the way to his younger son's basketball game up in Lincoln. So
maybe we could talk a little bit about that.
Spread.
The next podcast we're going to have, if Nebraska basketball plays.
Well, that's the other thing. This COVID pause has thrown a monkey wrench. Like a couple stories I'm working on that with timeline have.
But if they play on
a
Tuesday,
yeah.
even if we have a podcast on Tuesday, the game will be played. And
correct.
Chucky Hepburn is coming back here on Tuesday. Hopefully, Lord willing, COVID willing.
Yeah.
And Nebraska's obviously had this horrible run.
PCR testing willing.
This horrible run of recruiting in-state basketball players. They just haven't had much success there, with the exception of Teddy Allen coming from being from a junior college after being kicked out of a school. But I don't know that I count Teddy. He didn't come to Nebraska right out of high school. He came to Nebraska.
I don't think Teddy bleeds corn.
But to grade success or failure, don't you have to make it a priority to get those guys? I as someone who doesn't cover that team, I kind of question how much that was a priority for them. Maybe that's not totally accurate.
What did Chucky's dad say?
Maybe not so much.
Chucky's dad, I mean, on this very topic, Chucky's dad was talking about how Nebraska and Creighton, frankly, could do more at the youth level and be more visible.
That's true.
Be more visible at the youth level,
Yeah.
bring the camps to the kids, make them more affordable, that sort of thing. And we were just talking, him and I were just talking about even putting a Nebraska penny on a 9-year-old when they're, some kid who, Nebraska basketball. Given the recent track record, there's not a ton of other reasons besides meeting the coaches and players and wearing the gear that Nebraska basketball would be super relevant to a 9-year-old right now. But I think that could have a major influence on that. The other problem with that is Tim Miles had a decent run, but Fred's been here for 3 years. There's been a lot of turnover at the coaching position at Nebraska on the basketball side. So even if you did do that and you build a connection with a promising 12-year-old prospect, if you're gone by the time he's 15, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's the youth thing is very true. There's not a presence. Some of this is that the people who tend to run camps, and this isn't a knock on specifically the Nebraska guys now or Nebraska football coaches or any of these things, they're not necessarily always they run the camps for various purposes, and they sometimes are from other places, these GAs or whatever, and they just don't. There isn't a giant grassroots strategy. It's kind of we expect these people to come, ooh, here's this guy over here that I know whose kid's coming because he's from New Jersey and I'm from New Jersey, or he's from Massachusetts and I'm from Massachusetts. It becomes more of a who you know thing. And like, unless you root in a place for a really long time, you're not necessarily going to appreciate the grassroots aspect of any given place.
Well,
like, it just takes time.
To that point, I mean, college basketball in general is just more transient now, right? Like, the tradition has faded away to some degree. And I asked Greg Hepburn and I asked the Bellevue West coach, Doug Woodard, this morning, like, is that home court advantage, like the in-state advantage, fading away a little bit? And I think they both had good points about how, kids, like, it's just a smaller world now. Like, you can tour, in this case, Wisconsin's campus on your phone without ever even going there. And you can interact with, if you like a player, you can follow them wherever they go. You don't have to necessarily go see them at, they don't have to go to Creighton. You don't have to be in the building to follow their career. You can build a connection with a team from a young age from anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, you have to accept, and this is, again, not just for basketball, but for football too. You have to accept that you're going to visit a coach's office any given place 20 times, and they're not going to have anybody for you. But you visited the 20 times on the off chance that 21st time they give you something. And in journalism, it's a little bit like that too with sources. Like, you have to accept that in journalism, there are times where you will talk to sources and you will walk away. And this isn't always easier for me because I can be impatient. You will walk away from a source having really gotten nothing. Like, nothing that you could use other than you built that for the next time that you need something. And it might be the 7th conversation that bears fruit. And so I think that Nebraska athletics has long struggled with having the first 6 conversations. Like, you don't necessarily make it magic on the first 6. Like, Scott Frost should have been in Omaha 15 times by now. And he hasn't. He hasn't been. And then, I mean, who else can... And by that, I don't mean like at Omaha High School. I mean, he should have made public appearances in the city many times. And he just hasn't done it.
Maybe that's part of this new CEO role.
We'll see. I hope so. Nothing really prevented him from doing it before. And, when he's done these tours, he's been to Fremont 3 times and Kearney 3 times. Like, there's some sort of weird whatever about not Omaha, especially not there. Something. I don't know what it is. But they've had that problem. And in basketball, I think there's just a feeling of, well, if we don't get this guy out in this town, they're not going to come up with another guy later on. So what's the point of even, like, it becomes, it's almost like a way in which Moneyball can work against you, because what Moneyball tells you is you have to constantly tether yourself to efficiency. And there are things that are inefficient about building a grassroots program, including that there will be times when the grass doesn't have very deep roots, but you keep watering it and tending to it until it does. And then all of a sudden you're 15 years down the line, and this is how they get Zach Wiegert. And this is how, Dave Volk comes from Battle Creek. And this is how, they get these linemen that you've never even heard, the guy from Hartington Cedar Catholic who played in the NFL. What was his name? Russ Hochstein, Like, this is how these guys develop, because Tom Osborne spent all those years developing those relationships all over the state, and then one day comes when a 6'5", 295-pound guy comes along, and he's an All-American. But it takes that much work just to get to that point. And Frost is actually pretty darn good in the smaller towns. Like, Ben Bramer's coming to Nebraska, and I don't think it was ever a question.
Right.
Ernest Hausman's coming to Nebraska, and I don't think it was much of a question. So Frost does a pretty good job there. It's Omaha. And Nebraska basketball has really struggled with it, too. Honestly, Nebraska basketball has missed out probably more than Nebraska football. No offense, but...
I don't think they ever... that was never their intention to build a grassroots program, though, right? That's not what they did at Iowa State.
I'm not even talking about Fred. I'm just talking about Nebraska
in
basketball
general,
since the day Roy Enright left Nebraska. Yeah. And you don't know who that is.
I don't.
But, like, Barry Collier came up here and offered Roy Enright and Jason DeRusso on basically the same day. And they both came to Nebraska, and Roy wasn't very good, and Jason was.
Well, Creighton's rise...
And after that, they stopped recruiting the city.
Creighton's rise has something to do with that, too, right?
Creighton's rise has something to do with Antoine Young and Kyrie Thomas.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, getting the best player from Central, Josh Jones. Getting the best player from Bell West, Antoine Young. Getting the best player, in Patton was not the best player in high school, but knowing that he was going to be good. And Kyrie was the best player in high school and getting him. Yeah, that has something to do with it. Dana Altman, when he built the program, built it on the back of Corver, and he built it on Iowa kids, to be honest with you. And then McDermott built it on his son.
Right.
I mean, if his son wasn't here, I don't know how that would have gone the first 4 years for Greg. But, of course, Doug came, and he's still in the NBA. So, but, yeah, we've kind of gotten off track. But it's an interesting conversation because you talk about philosophy, and the one program that's really nailed it is volleyball.
Yeah.
Like, volleyball gets it. They're everywhere. John Cook doesn't have to go to Omaha necessarily all the time because they come to him because he has a network. There are a number of former Husker volleyball players who run club programs in the state.
He also has a resume
He
and
does.
a track record and
Sure.
one of the most powerful brands in the sport, which Nebraska football no longer has.
Sure.
And
But
Nebraska
Darren
basketball
Erstad had a resume, and he didn't have that much success recruiting the state. Will Bolt comes in, and he does.
That's true. Yep, same sort of deal.
It's resume, but it's also give a crap. And like Erstad's recruiting coordinator did not care about a lot of the kids in the state. This wasn't his thing, and Erstad didn't like to recruit as much as Bolt does.
It's funny because there were actually a lot of similarities between Erstad and their recruiting and Fred Hoiberg and their recruiting, where the recruiting coordinator had ties on a coast outside the state. The head man didn't really care to do it much. He's a former star player and was more of a closer type. And you're right. I mean, baseball's absolutely the same way. They let some really talented players get away. Alec Boehm was the number 3 overall draft pick out of Omaha.
No, North, I thought. Roncalli.
Roncalli.
Yeah, he was
right.
Roncalli.
He's number 3 overall pick in the draft. He went to Wichita State because Nebraska wasn't interested. It's that kind of stuff. And Chucky Hepburn in basketball now, that's the kind of stuff that kills you because I think like Boehm was then, like everybody knew who followed Hepburn knew he was going to be good. Like he has all the intangibles, great defender, can shoot. And so like it wasn't a surprise necessarily what he's doing at Wisconsin now, right? And I think that's what really irks the fan base, people that live here that know the area when those guys get away because again, a little bit of effort, a little bit of elbow grease, I suppose, by the coaches, and those guys can end up in your hometown.
I would say, I mean, even when Trev Alberts said recently, I forget what he was talking about, but he was talking about he wants to see Nebraska athletics programs that reflect the values of the state. And it's like, okay, roll your eyes a little bit. But that's a lot of the frustration with the basketball. If Nebraska basketball had the same record, people are going to be upset no matter what, but if they had the same record and it was just because they didn't have the talent or they were being outmanned, out-recruiting starred, it'd be different. But like these performances where you just, all right, we're done. You take your foot off the gas against Rutgers on the road. That's what really nags people.
Kobe Webster seems to agree.
It's quite the segue, yeah. Kobe Webster said some interesting things on the radio this week. He was on 93.7 The Ticket, hanging out with Derek Pearson and Rashawn Jackson, and they were asking him.
Rashawn Jackson, for people who don't know, is a former Nebraska football player and captain who was part of the 90s team. So he won national titles in 94 and 95. I think he was a senior in 96, but he might have played on that 97 team
97
too.
co-captain.
So Rashawn has a lot of wisdom and cachet and all that. He's been there and done that in terms of winning. Go ahead.
So they asked Kobe how often do they work on the ABCs of basketball. They were talking particularly about boxing out, and Kobe, I think, gave a pretty standard answer, something like not enough, and it shows, whatever, because Nebraska's not a good rebounding team. And then they started talking about, like, okay, but what are you guys doing to correct that? And the quote that's jumped out was Kobe Webster saying something to the effect of, I don't have it in front of me, the coaches always talk about player-led teams, and I've talked about this with Coach, but how can you expect the players to hold the players accountable if you guys aren't holding the players accountable? And at this point, the interview was kind of paused, They went to a break. They rolled that over into their next show, and then they never addressed it again because Kobe Webster flew too close to the sun. At least that's the only. I don't know why else they wouldn't do it, unless they were deliberately tanking their own listenership. I don't think they were doing that because that was, it was quite the tease.
Well,
and
they
then
we don't know exactly why, but they didn't get back to it.
They didn't circle back to it. Then the next segment was Jackson telling Kobe he could beat him one-on-one. It was great. But yeah. So this is it's extremely notable when a player says something like this. It's something that I think the fans have been positing for a while, and I don't pretend I haven't talked to anyone about this yet within the program about what Kobe might have been referring to or who Kobe might have been referring to that isn't being held accountable. I have guesses, but it's not. I don't think it's productive to throw them out there over the airwaves. It's just very significant that a player, not only a player, a experienced grad transfer who is not new. This is second year in the program. One of the guys that I would assume Fred Hoiberg is not worried about stepping in front of a microphone says something like this. I don't know why Kobe said it over a public airway. He could have just said, we don't talk about stuff that happens behind the scenes in public like that. But he did, and now it's going to be a thing. And now I'm over the next. It'll probably start tomorrow. Fred's gonna come out and talk about the COVID stuff, and there will be a few other unpleasant questions.
Is that over Zoom or is that in person?
It's in person at Devaney. I don't know, man. I guess Fred's clean.
Well, yeah, but I'm not worried for you.
No. I understand.
That's just. I guess that's good that he hasn't tested positive. That's very good.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have that's not a grand take, but that was weird, man. I don't know I don't know why he would say it, and if he said it, that leads me to believe that there's some kernel of truth to it. That's a major problem.
Yeah, if you're thinking it to the point to where you say it, then it's on the minds of a lot of guys. I don't know. Can something like that be a positive, like for a team that has struggled?
I love this take.
Well, for a team that has struggled as much as Nebraska,
when
why?
A player calls out his coach on the radio, it can be.
Like, why not?
It happens in the NBA.
Shake it the
this
heck
is
up,
not the NBA,
right?
But
Shake it up. Like,
yeah.
You're 0-8. Whatever you've done to this point clearly hasn't worked. Maybe it's a little, I don't know, reverse leadership going on here. Maybe it's just a little something that's gonna light a fire.
I forget Kobe. I actually talked to Kobe about this the first time I ever talked to him. He have some sort of. He wants to be a coach, so he does take these kinds of like psychology classes. Maybe
he's an academic All-American.
Yeah.
He's real sharp.
And it's not a button that you push a lot, maybe even more than once. But at this point in the year, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? You lose more games. You lose by 30 again. Like,
yeah.
What's the worst thing that can happen? I don't know. I
don't
hate it.
They didn't just shake the snow globe up though. They shook it. And then they bowled the snow globe into a pile of other snow globes. Like that's
quite an analogy.
It's not. It would be probably the first time this has been tried in this setting. Sam says it happens in the NBA. This is not the NBA. The college basketball everyone is more expected to fall in line. So it just blew me away that this was something that happened.
The analogy makes me wonder if the fluid inside a snow globe is gooey. I have no idea.
It bubbles though when you shake it, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess this is. Nebraska's basketball program has been pretty media forward, I think is the right word to put it there. Obviously Trey and Bryce have a podcast. Other guys have been on that. The radio station in question, has those players on, I think, with some frequency.
Kobe's on the airwaves a decent amount.
Yeah, and they've had coaches. Yeah. I think Buzzy Carruthers has a show.
He does.
Really enjoy Buzzy. So there's
Yakadunga.
Right. And Matt Abdelmassi was on, he did a lot of interviews. I don't know if he has a show.
Yeah,
Lance Harvell has a show, obviously.
All the assistants rotate on.
Anyway, it's media forward.
Show. Yes.
And, there does come a point where you're like, and maybe this, hey, we're just gonna be done talking because we're not winning, so we're gonna be done. And what I mean is that the head coach just says, all right, everybody's done. You want to play, get off the airwaves and stop. And let's just figure this out together. Because I do think there's actually a positive that can come from, but we are going to ask Fred about this tomorrow. We're going to ask, like, what is going on in a program where one of your players, an academic All-American who's a 60-year senior, is going on a radio show and calling out the coaches for not holding players accountable? Who isn't being held accountable? Why aren't they being held accountable? And why is one of your best players, whom everybody respects as a leader, not able to communicate successfully, A, with his teammates, or B, you, in order to affect an outcome? Like, what's going on within the framework of this operation? And, maybe that will shake him up a little bit. I do feel like Fred has been, better in the last 3 or 4 weeks, ever since the Michigan loss. And I think there's been an awareness or an understanding of what was going on, and but nevertheless, I don't think it's kind of it's a bad sign that you're losing a lot of basketball games, and yet somebody feels like they need to go and say that. Like, everybody needs to get better, And then obviously you're theorizing, is he talking about Alonzo Verge? And to be honest with you, I think Verge is being held accountable.
100%.
Other than he never play. Accountability to Alonzo Verge would be not playing at all, which would lead to certain defeat. I mean, they're already losing, but you bench him, and I don't know that you're going to...
Especially before Trey came back.
And you can say, oh, well, nice things, but no, I'm sorry. You can't just eliminate 12 points a game from the Roop, especially, when the offense stagnates and there's literally nothing going on except him trying to drive to the rim.
There are advanced numbers that favor Kobe Webster over Alonzo Verge.
Yeah.
2 things: Kobe Webster plays much shorter stints than Alonzo Verge, and often against backup units. And the second thing is, just like you said, when it breaks down, can Kobe Webster get to the rim? Alonzo Verge might not always make the best decision when he gets into the paint. He's going to get there.
Right.
He can beat the guy in front of him. Kobe Webster is a good player. He's a good shooter. He can create his own shot. He can't create the same way that Alonzo Verge can. Not with the same reliability.
And the first 2 plays of the Indiana game. So people kind of overlooked this. Obviously, they couldn't get over the hump late. First 2 offensive trips of the game against Indiana, they're behind 4-0 because of ridiculous plays by someone other than Alonzo Verge.
Yeah.
Neither one of those plays were his fault.
Brutal Derek Walker forced pass toward the corner, and then I think the other one was a Casey,
who,
by the way, he doesn't touch the ball a whole lot, but has one of the lowest turnover rates in the country.
Right.
And he just threw it away.
Well, it's because they're trying really hard to do the right thing. I think Verge generally does, not always, but I think they try really hard.
He's well-intentioned
to run the offense, and sometimes it looks like it looks mechanical. It looks like I'm going to try to do something that's ill-advised in order to do what I have been advised to do. And sometimes it just feels like Nebraska's lost that natural rhythm that you get into in a basketball game, where you're making the plays that are available to you instead of trying to make the plays that you've been told to make.
Well, that's what more coach control over an offense can look like sometimes. But when they were freewheeling and freelancing, it wasn't working either. So I don't know. I guess you could try to they're trying to strike a balance, and they haven't found it yet.
So while the men's basketball program is in a COVID pause, the men's football program...
A lot of noise for a COVID pause, right?
A lot of noise.
Noisy COVID pause.
The football side
not
is
a
also
COVID mute.
Not playing, but it's also been very active in its own headlines.
Yes.
Nebraska football up to 10 transfers, 8 of whom are on campus and will be participants in spring ball. And since we've talked last week, they have added, I believe it's 3 transfers since that time. So they had an official visit weekend last weekend. It was important because it was sort of that last chance for transfer prospects to come in and then be able to enroll in class and get going for spring. So of those 4, the 3 transfers have since committed. That was Chubba Purdy, quarterback from Florida State. That was Anthony Grant, the running back from New Mexico Military Institute. and defensive back Javier Morton from Garden City in Kansas. And so let's start with the quarterback discussion, because that sets up a really interesting spring now where Nebraska is going to have 5 scholarship quarterbacks here. Casey Thompson, the resident vet who started at Texas last year. You've got Purdy. You've got Logan Smothers, who was here last year. Heinrich Harburg, who will be in his second year. And Richard Torres from San Antonio, who graduated early in the 2022 class. He'll be here. You have Matt Masker, as Sam mentioned. And then in the summer, you'll add Mikey Pauley, the baseball scholarship commit who had
with Mikey Bowe, who authored the 2007 Tunnel Walk song.
Very good. Pauley had scholarship offers as a football player from Kansas and Kansas State, so he's no slouch either. How do you guys sort of?
He won't be in spring. He'll be playing baseball.
Yeah, right. He won't be here till the summer. How do you guys sort of handicap the race? Because it feels like Casey Thompson's sort of that obvious front runner. Yeah. But how do you sort of, if you were to make a depth chart or sort of stack things up heading into the spring, how do you size this thing up?
I mean, I think Thompson's a pretty strong favorite to win the starting job. I think Chubba Purdy's a pretty strong favorite to be the backup, with Logan Smothers lingering in the background. To me, the commitment of Chubba Purdy is it's about a quarterback race, sure, and it's about someone who could push Casey Thompson maybe a little bit more in the spring. But to me, it's more about, first, it's about a succession plan. If everything goes awesome next year and Casey Thompson shines like Kenny Pickett did in this offense, and he ends up going to the NFL or doesn't want to play football anymore, whatever. You have someone that you can throw into the mix that isn't a guy that is a guy with a big-time recruiting background, and you don't have to thrust a Richard Torres or a Heinrich Harburg into a role that maybe they're not ready for, if you don't like what you see from Smothers last year. It's just another option to have there. Another highly rated option is super important to have for that quarterback room. The other thing is just like, this team just went 3-9, and they still were able to sell this kid who, it sounds like from reading his quotes, understands he might not be the starter, and that's okay with him. And a lot of the reason that he came to Nebraska was his connection with Mark Whipple, and he believes in the positive momentum that Nebraska has built since their 3-9 season. If you can build positive momentum from a 3-9 season so much, he's convinced Mark Whipple will be there for longer than 1 year, right? Because he believes that he'll be around to play, and he believes that Mark Whipple will still be around there. So that, to me, is not a small feat to pull off, to convince not just him, but I mean, like a guy like Anthony Grant, who was sought after in a lot of circles. These guys where, incremental progress. They lost a lot of games. You went 3-9. Illinois went 5-7 with a new coach. You went 3-9 with a bunch of 6-year guys. And they were still able to push that narrative forward, and convince guys that had other options to come here. I think that there's something to be said for that.
Good thoughts, Jimmy. Let me read you something here.
Story time with Sam.
65.7% completion rate. 3,982 yards, 27 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, 8.4 yards per attempt. That is Brock Purdy's stats as a sophomore at Iowa State in 2019. I don't know if Chubba Purdy is as good as his older brother. But if he is, and that reveals itself very quickly, I don't know why you wouldn't necessarily give him a really, really good shot to winning the job. I don't know the answer to either one of those questions. I know he was hurt. We don't know. But Chubba Purdy had just as good of a high school reputation as Brock did. Mm-hmm. So those were both notable. And you have to take that into account when you're thinking about this job. Here's one thing that has happened now. When you bring in 2, you're basically saying to some degree, we haven't anointed anybody. Like, if you just bring in the 1, then everybody's like, well, he's the one. Now you bring in this other guy, and it's like, well, he's probably the one, but they brought in the other guy. And all the players on the team are smart enough to know we got to win this year. So they're probably going to play the guy they think is going to help them win most. So then it becomes a competition. It becomes more of a competition now, and it also becomes more of a this is what's tricky. For all the players in the program, the position guys and the linemen and all this stuff, they got 2 guys to get to know now. Actually, they have 3 with Torres, but I think most people accept that Richie Torres is nowhere near playing major college football, in part because he's still rehabbing an ACL. So now they got 2 new guys to know. You don't just get to know one guy. You got to know 2 guys. 2 guys are going to be organizing throwing sessions. 2 guys are going to be doing get to know you things. 2 guys are going to be doing that. And then you got Logan Smothers over here as a 3rd guy. And then you got Harburg over here as a 4th. So when you bring in 2, you remove that anointed one aspect of the conversation. And I think almost inevitably it becomes a more interesting dynamic. And I'm quite surprised, to be honest with you, I'm surprised that Purdy came, but he's here. And I have to think that he thinks he's going to win the job.
Well, I said on this podcast 2 weeks ago that I thought Purdy would come anyway. And the reason that I thought that was not just because of his respect for Whipple, which is extremely high, but also because I feel like his track and Casey Thompson's track are quite different. I mean, Casey Thompson has 2 years left of eligibility maximum. Maybe he has a great year this year and moves on, like you said, Jimmy. Purdy has 4 years to go. So it's really like, yeah, they're both coming in at the same time, but this is not like a high school recruiting class where you take 2 quarterbacks. I mean, these guys are on different timelines. And so if Purdy can come in and, be that backup for a year or 2 and then take over the job, like I think he would take that because he trusts Whipple that much. And, the other part of the conversation that this inevitably leads to then is, what was the stat from one of the recruiting sites yesterday? Like 60-some% of quarterbacks, scholarship quarterbacks have transferred. Like you just kind of accept the fact that somebody may move on after the spring once you see how things shake out. And even that conversation is interesting to me because, again, Thompson and Purdy are the hand-picked guys who come in for a new system under Whipple. Everyone points to Smothers as being that guy who leaves. He was committed to the program. If people forget, he was committed, Smothers was, to Nebraska before Adrian Martinez took a snap. Like, he's been committed for a long time. He's invested in this program. So, like, I don't get the sense that he's ready to move on or ready to give up. Like, I think this will be an important spring for him, but I don't think he's moving on. And then you have Harburg, who's, local kid, Kearney Catholic. It's just his 2nd year. I think people agree that we all like his measurables and what he could project to be. And then Torres is new. So it's really, like, to me, I look at that room and see a ton of competition and really no obvious candidate to leave right away. So it feels a lot more wide open than the last 3 springs where we knew Adrian Martinez was the guy going in and you're looking at the backup battle. This is a whole different dynamic. Makes it really interesting for the spring.
Let me ask you this. To your point, Sam, about 2 guys having throwing sessions, 2 guys getting to know you.
That's right.
2 different leadership styles. 2 different.
Well, I don't know if they have different leadership.
Well, potentially, whatever. Potentially 2 different leadership styles.
Right.
2 different ways of doing business.
You better believe it.
Can that be a negative? Like, because it might be harder to get everyone flowing in one direction.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, again, Smothers has his too.
True.
But the thing is that, oftentimes there'll be a quarterback that's just like, well, I'm going to go out and throw. Do you want to come with me? And my point is that it won't just be one guy that wants to go do that. It's going to be 2. And at least, and maybe 3. I mean, Logan knows these guys better than anybody. So, like, it's a challenge in the sense that inevitably the coordinator has to make the decision. The coordinator was very comfortable with Casey Thompson coming. 1. He basically recruited and lobbied very hard for Chubba Purdy to come. Correct?
Fair, absolutely.
Why would you do that unless you thought he was really good? And if he's really good, then why can't he win the job now? Again, those aren't necessarily, I don't know that he's really good. I don't know that he's going to win the job now. But I'm creating the question of, if that guy's the guy, then that guy's going to play. They don't have time to, patronize anybody. And to your point, yes. I mean, it's likely that Purdy coming would, he's got 4 years. The whole program has one.
Right.
1 year.
No doubt.
Maybe 2. If they go 6-6, I am confident that they'll get another year. But they don't have, this isn't... He could have gone to Oklahoma. Apparently he could have. That's what we understand.
Mm-hmm.
And he would have been behind Dylan Gabriel for 1 year. And the coach there isn't going anywhere. He just got there. So he'll be there for possibly 10 years, but he'll be there for at least 3 or 4. Unless it goes completely bad and then whatever. So Purdy came to Nebraska. He's already transferred once. He doesn't get to do a free transfer again.
Right.
Got to think he's coming here because he thinks he's going to win the job. And not like in 3 years. Why would he transfer to somewhere where he isn't going to be the starter? He would transfer to somewhere where he thought he was going to be the starter. And here's why I give you this example. Michigan State is a good example. Michigan State added a transfer quarterback. His name was Anthony Russo. I wrote that I thought Russo was going to play. Russo didn't play. Peyton Thorne, who was already there, and, by the way, did not start in 2020. That was Rocky Lombardi. Peyton Thorne, who was already there, is the starting quarterback. So they brought in this Russo kid to start. He was from Temple. He didn't start. This other guy is the quarterback. Another example. 2012. Wisconsin loses Russell Wilson. They bring in this guy named Danny O'Brien. Does anybody remember this guy? He was a starter. I think his name was Danny O'Brien. He was a starter at Maryland. Brought him in. They were certain he was going to start. He started for 2 games. They went out and scored 7 points at Oregon State and Mike Riley. And then Danny got benched for you wouldn't know this.
In 2012?
Yeah.
I would guess.
Drops to Jupiter by train. Joel Stave.
That was my
Stave,
guess. Yeah.
They had another guy.
Joel.
So Stave got, remember, and then he plays, and then he gets hurt, and then in the Big Ten championship game, it's Kurt Phillips who plays. Danny O'Brien was, third. And I'm not saying that Casey Thompson is either one of those stories. I'm just saying that a guy does not commit to Nebraska after he's left somewhere else. This isn't a freshman. This isn't a JUCO kid who can leave for somewhere else. I think he's coming here because he thinks he's going to win the job.
How about 2007 Nebraska?
Right.
Sam Keller comes in as the transfer to try to replace Zach Taylor.
And
he starts
won the
for half
job.
the year. He
Yeah.
did. But Joe Gans took it over,
Right.
and the rest was history. He was already on the team. So, yeah, that's even happened here.
The question is Chuba Purdy as good as Brock Purdy? I don't know. I have no idea. Is he? We'll find out. If he is, the numbers that I just read off to you are the numbers that Brock produced when he was Chuba's age.
Brock
So
also,
I don't know.
Brock
thing-
also kind of fluctuated.
The thing that holds the
He
thing
was
that
up and down.
Yeah, but the numbers that I just read off were
Ironclad. You're right.
better than anything
Yes.
Nebraska's
No,
produced.
you're right.
Now, granted, he had Alan Lazard,
Yep.
and I think he had another guy. I can't even remember the other guy he had. But, he had some good players. I'm not trying to say he didn't. He had Breece Hall. I think he had David Montgomery, honestly, and he was throwing to him. But if Chubb is as good as his older brother, and his older brother put up those numbers, we can't necessarily say we know that Casey Thompson's going to be the starter. I would say I'm almost sure that he is, but I don't know it. And I don't think Chuba Purdy came here because he thought he was going to sit for 2 years.
Maybe not. I just think, like you said, Sam, there's an urgency to 2022.
There is.
And so just looking at that room, do you want to go with the guy who started 10 games at Texas and led the Big 12 in touchdown passes, or the guy who may be very talented in Chuba Purdy, but had a collarbone injury and has been a reserve in, I think, 4 games across 2
Yep.
seasons? Like,
That's the question.
do you hitch your wagon to that horse
Right.
in 2022? And fair or not, I think you're the coaching staff. You got to get to 6 wins.
Yep.
You got to show some signs of progress.
Yep.
The known quantity to me has the huge leg up regardless of talent. And Purdy would really have to ball out, I think, in the spring and the
Yep.
summer to push ahead.
He
I
also
agree
has
with
a
that.
massive leg up in maturity and experience in terms of, like, when we first talked about Casey Thompson coming here, I was talking about he's been under the same microscope at Texas. Brock Purdy was at Florida State, but more in the background. Hasn't been center stage like Casey
right.
Thompson has.
Sure.
So another leg up there.
I think my point is that what Nebraska needs most isn't they need really good quarterback play. That's what they need most.
No doubt.
And whomever produces that is whomever produces it. I think if I were Smothers, I would be like, well, they just brought in 2 guys. One guy's older, one guy's younger. What am I going to be doing?
And they had
he's got to have a really good spring in order to hang in there.
And they did that after they watched him play a game.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
No, and Whipple's got to bring his own guys in. That's all true and well and known and all that. But I just thought if Purdy comes, then that means something. It's not simultaneously Thompson comes and then Purdy comes and then isn't Nebraska good at its job? Well, sort of, yes, but in reality, they're good at their job, but also this other guy must think he's going to start. He's not coming there to sit for 2 years, is he?
I mean, he's coming here to get developed by Mark Whipple, and if that happens this year, I think that's great. But if it doesn't, he still has 3 years. How many guys can realistically expect to be a college starter at quarterback for 3 or 4 years?
Well, his older brother did.
Oh, sure. I just don't think that's a common.
His predecessor
I don't think you
at
can
Nebraska
just assume that's going to happen.
did.
And you got to have that swagger, and Whipple spoke to that about the guys that he's looking for with that confidence and, kind of a jerk sometimes. And I'm not saying Purdy is that, but you got to have a certain confidence in yourself, and that's great. But it may not always match up with reality in the situation either.
For whatever reason, Whipple really likes him. And he's ready to bring him to Pittsburgh, where I assume he would have started. He would have competed for the job, even though now we know what's his face went there because his girlfriend goes there. But I assume that he likes Chubba Purdy. Clearly. I'm just saying that he has this long-term relationship with Chubba Purdy that goes back a ways, and I think he talked to him every single day until he committed. I don't think he brought him here for his insurance policy, although he may be a very good insurance policy. I'm not sure that he brought him here as an insurance policy.
That's probably a debate for another day. Like when has Nebraska had this kind of quality depth at quarterback? Beyond the starter.
2019.
I mean, they had Vedral and Martinez, but in hindsight, that's an interesting conversation.
That's a rabbit hole, that 2019 season. But unless they feel like Logan Smothers is going to leave, which I don't think there's been any indication given there, they had a backup.
They did. That's true. But the other thing about Smothers is we saw him start in the Iowa game last year, but how they used him was not sustainable over the course of a full season. What do you have? 25 carries,
was
quarterback
sustainable
carries?
Over the whole game?
Right. You just can't do it. Right. So, can Smothers adjust to more of a pass-heavy offense, or does the offense continue as it is? It just doesn't. I think Smothers will have to show some sort of change from how they've used him previously for him to have a shot under whatever it'll look like moving forward.
That's it. I'll just tell you that. That's a heck of a good point. I'll write about this later, but over the last 4 years since Frost got there, no team has averaged more quarterback carries per game than Nebraska. Nebraska's averaged 16. Any guesses who's number 2?
Army?
Yeah, one of the
No, I mean in the
teams.
Big Ten.
In the Big Ten.
In the Big Ten. No, outside of the Big Ten, Nebraska's not number 1. It's Army and Navy.
Right.
In the Big Ten.
Rutgers?
They're 3rd. Penn State is 2nd.
Okay.
So the top 5 are Nebraska,
That's a Trace
Penn State,
yeah.
Rutgers, Illinois, and Northwestern. Now, outside of Penn State, which had a couple of good seasons in there, none of those programs are bathed in glory. I know that Northwestern had a couple of divisional titles, but those were sandwiched in between 3 and 9 and whatever the hell they went this year.
Yeah.
So they don't have any answers. They rarely have answers at quarterback. Right. And the years in which their quarterback numbers were high was 19 and 21. They went down when they were good.
Mm-hmm.
So Nebraska doubles the rate of the rest of the Big Ten West. They double the rate. Of all the teams in the Big Ten, the 3 lowest, and maybe Michigan is in here too, but the 3 lowest are Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. Is there any coincidence that those teams have dominated Nebraska for the last 3 or 4 years, and they're also at the top of their respective division?
And they just don't make a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
And that's a product of that. Yes, yeah. Right.
It's just, you have to, if you're going to do this quarterback run thing, you better have a hell of a lot of talent, and you better there's a lot of different. Urban Meyer ran the heck out of his quarterbacks. When Urban Meyer left, Ryan Day completely changed it, and they stopped running their quarterbacks almost entirely. Justin Fields had a few, but but they generally stopped running them. And so we'll see. I mean, I think they've got to adjust that. That's one of the number one things they've got to look at, and I don't know what they're going to do with it.
Let me ask you guys, we talked about the 3 transfers that have committed in the last week. What Nebraska's doing in the defensive back room is really interesting because they lose 3 of their 4 starters, both safeties, Deontay Williams, Markel Dismuke. Cam Taylor-Britt declares early for the draft as a corner, and then they lost a couple reserves to the portal, Malik Williams and then Nadab Joseph, who really didn't see the field much. So they lose 5 out of the DB room. They've added 6 so far, and they might not be done. They've had Tommy Hill, the transfer from Arizona State, a couple JUCO guys, Deshaun Singleton and Javier Morton this weekend, and then 3 preps, Jaden Gould, Jaleel Martin, Malcolm Hartzog. Like, I personally, I felt like they didn't need to add that much, but they clearly did feel that.
They think they do.
Yes, they do. Like, what do you feel like that indicates, not just for the room going forward, but then maybe how they feel about some of the guys that are coming back in the room that have been there for a couple of years? We're talking beyond Quentin Newsome, Noah Pola-Gates, and Miles Farmer, and guys like that.
I mean, it feels dart throwy to me. It's you want to have, if you're unsure of, it's kind of like draft picks. Draft picks like recruiting in exact science. So what do teams do? They get a bunch of draft picks because you're not gonna hit on a first rounder every year. But if you have 3 first rounders a year, you might hit on a couple of those. So I think it's that simple. It's a principle of volume, bodies. We can try to develop all these different guys. They like all of them for different reasons. They have a lot of different positions to fill, and so they went out and got a bunch of guys. For the guy, if I'm a guy that's in that room that stayed, I don't feel great about that. But if I'm a coach who feels a little bit uneasy about the defensive back room, I think that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, it comes down to whether the 2 junior college guys they added are different than the guys that they've added in the past. The recent junior college additions have been Deontay Williams was pretty good, hurt a lot, but Will Jackson, no. Nadab Joseph, no. So those have been additions, and then they had all the freshmen leave. So Jaden Francois, Gray, Henry Gray, Ronald Delancey, and there might have been a 4th one. I can't remember if the 4th corner left too, but those 3 guys left in that class. And then obviously Malik Williams, who I remember us having discussions about Malik Williams. He left. So they had to replace him with somebody, and I think there's a sense that, they probably feel like they've got 2 starters in Miles Farmer and Quentin Newsome. And then, you got to find 2 more. And some of the guys that have been around there a while just have never quite kicked over into a great role. Like, Noah Pola-Gates has not really emerged in that way. Braxton Clark has been on and off the field. I know he had this, sort of publicized position battle with Newsome, but Newsome played almost every snap, and Clark didn't play much at all. So, I feel like they think they must, and I trust Travis Fisher. I trust his instincts. He knows what he's doing. I think they have to get a couple of guys in there who can actually play right away. And maybe Buford is close, but that's not enough. You need 6, right? Because at one point last year, Williams had gotten hurt, and who else got hurt? Who else got banged up? Somebody, I thought.
And there were games last year, too, when guys have had targeting, and they were out for a half.
And then let's go back to 2019, right? So that year, Deontay Williams was out for the year with a shoulder injury, and then remember Cam Taylor-Britt was sick. He didn't have COVID because it was pre-COVID, but he had that horrible flu or whatever. Didn't go to Purdue.
Purdue game, yeah.
And they were playing, what's his name, the walk-on? I can't remember his name now.
At corner?
Nah, it was at safety that day. I can't remember who it was, but they were playing a walk-on back there, and they had another backup safety in there, and Dismuke was paired with that walk-on, and then Cam Taylor-Britt wasn't there, so I think they had to play another corner.
Boodle had to move around.
Yeah. You need 6 or 7 or 8.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this has always rattled around in my head. Whatever people think of Mike Riley, I don't give a crap, but he knows football really well. And so one of the things he would always say is you can never have enough. He's like, defensive backs are like gold. You can never have enough of them, and you can never have enough wide receivers. And he believed that. Like, he really was into, I love having good corners. love having good safeties. And I think Travis Fisher's the same way. He just wants to have as many good players in there as possible. The key is there that Scott Frost, and I give Frost credit here, Frost lets him get them. Like at some point, Scott could say, Coach Fisher, T-Fish, whatever. You can't have any more guys. I gave you Javier Morton and Deshaun Singleton and Tommy Hill, and you can't have this guy from Northern Iowa who might come. You can't, just too many of them, But
because every scholarship they give to them, you can't give to an O lineman or a D lineman,
right.
or shore up anywhere
They're pretty
else.
generous at this. Now they're going to have 5 QBs. I don't know, 19 running backs. They have 5 running backs right now. They could have 6 if a Jay Allen commits to Nebraska. So we're talking 5 QBs, 6 running backs, however many DBs. Where are they light? Well, they're kind of light on some certain spots on the defense.
On the line.
They're pretty comfortable. They must be very comfortable with what they've got at D line, and then it's Payne, Nelson, Tanner, Gunnarsson, and I think Huli's is sort of that position too. That's not a ton of guys. I thought
Gifford, maybe.
Well, Gifford is the nickel.
Yeah.
Right. Doman told me Kolarvik might move out to the nickel spot. So those you got to tip your cap to Barrett Ruud and tip your cap to Mike Dawson. They're getting it done with fewer guys. They're not going to. I don't think they're going to replace Will Honus. Honus
Probably
left.
not.
If Kolarvik goes out to safety, or goes out to this nickel spot, you got Luke Reimer, Nick Henrich, Garrett Snodgrass, Randolph Kapai, who I don't think is. He's a great kid, but I think he's probably needs
Another
15,
year.
20
Yeah.
more pounds. Self Malcolm needs 15, 20 more pounds.
Right. Ativa Malga Clemens, maybe.
He's
Been a
you
special teams
basically
guy.
got 4 guys there, and you're saying, keep them healthy because Hannah left. They didn't replace him.
Nope.
Honus left. They're not going to replace him. And if Kolarvik goes out, then you're basically dealing with, Henrich, Reimer, Snodgrass. And, of course, you can move Kolarvik back in. But tip your cap to Barrett Ruud, who's who's doing, is getting the job done with only about 4 or 5 scholarship guys.
I still think the area that I'm a little nervous for Nebraska for is on the lines both ways, because just because they haven't added guys doesn't mean that they don't want to. The guy from East Tennessee State, Tremont Shorts, was someone that they were in on for a long time before LSU came in late, and so he went there. And the guy from Miami, Nesta Jade Silvera, was someone that Nebraska thought
he's good.
that they could land. He would have replaced Damian Daniels effectively in the middle of that line. He goes to Arizona State at the 11th hour.
And perhaps surpassed that.
Very much. And so now we're to the point. So, in theory, Nebraska could still make portal ads for this semester up to January 25th. So next Tuesday, you can enroll in classes by that time and still be here. But at this point, the portal's fairly well dried up of top end contributors. So really, it kind of leaves Nebraska. The defensive side's not so bad because you can probably add somebody in the summer that can still come in and make an impact. But man, if you're going to add an offensive lineman, now's the time to do it so you can get some reps, you can get to know the quarterbacks, the system, and all that. And so, they've added Kevin Williams out of the portal. They've added Justin Jenkins, a high schooler from New Jersey. And that's about it. So we'll see. The world turns, we turn, but we're going to leave you at that. We'll be back next week, hopefully with some more basketball talk.
Hopefully I'll have a resolution in my Twitter story. We'll see.
That'll be the tease for this podcast is we want to hear Sam's hacked Twitter account story. And there may be a resolution to that. We'll be a week closer to baseball. Football will continue on. Thanks for listening. Stay warm. We'll talk to you later.